Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And it's good to see you all here today. We've been discussing the Diamond Sutra, the Diamond Cutting Sutra, the Diamond Cutting Sutra of perfect wisdom, cutting delusions. Most would agree, a difficult text in some ways, and a text that needs to be perhaps more absorbed than understood. But nonetheless, we will try to talk about it in such a way to make it more understandable and share thoughts about it. It's a pivotal text in the Mahayana tradition. Last week, we talked about the notion of generosity, of giving, and the illusory nature of the giver, the recipient, the gift. In some ways, the illusory nature of the action of giving, of being of benefit to others, even though the Bodhisattva vow centrally talks about being of benefit to all beings, to others, including oneself. So we'll move on this week to the next section, which, without any commentary whatsoever, might be mystifying. But I'll read it first, and then we can talk a bit about it afterward. As with other sections in the Diamond Sutra, there is a conversation going on between Subhuti and Shakyamuni Buddha. And interestingly, it's the Buddha who is asking the questions. Oftentimes in sutras or in suttas, early Buddhist teachings, people are questioning the Buddha and he's responding. But in this case, the Buddha is asking questions of Subhuti and in more or less testing his responses. So this section goes, Subhuti, what do you think? Is it possible to recognize the Tathagata by means of bodily marks? No, world-honored one, Subhuti replies. And why? When the Tathagata speaks of the bodily marks, he speaks of the no possession of no marks. The Buddha then says to Subhuti, all that has a form is an illusory existence. All that has a form is an illusory existence. When the illusory nature of form is perceived, the Tathagata is recognized. When the illusory nature of form is perceived, the Tathagata is recognized. Well, that I'm sure might sound mystifying if you haven't encountered that passage before. First of all, what are all these marks that he's talking about? What are all these bodily marks of the Tathagata, the Buddha? The Buddha often speaks of himself in third person terms, referring to himself in various ways, but most often the Tathagata. One who comes and goes, suchness, various translations of that term. So what are these bodily marks? Well, they really refer to physical features that the Buddha reportedly had that identified him as a sage. And there were 32 such features. Actually, there are another 80 or so um, minor features that are mentioned. So there are quite a few of these. And we obviously won't go through them all, but for example, the Buddha was said to have prolonged or long earlobes and a tuft of hair between his eyebrows and a long tongue and a top knot. And some of these features are prominent in representations of the Buddha, in artistic representations of the Buddha in later centuries. So where did all this come from? It sounds strange to us, steeped in Western culture perhaps, but um, these come from pre-Buddhist, before the time of the Buddha, Vedic beliefs about physical features of a sage. And since the Buddha was perceived as a sage and revered as a sage, it was assumed that he would have these physical features. And whether he actually possessed all of these physical features is somewhat beside the point. I think it's probably doubtful. But in any case, these were considered the marks, the bodily marks identifying him as a sage, a Buddha. It speaks to how cultural lore is applied to individuals and it becomes part of the tradition. And in the West, we do have, some kinds of similar things about birthmarks. There's folklore about if a birthmark is of such and such a type and in such and such a location, it tells you something about the character of the individual or the future prospects of a child, etc. All these things are I think most of us would attribute to superstition and folklore, but in any case, they are a part of the culture. Even now, people do sometimes carry these beliefs. But what is the Buddha trying to say here? Subhuti, when he responds to this query about the bodily marks, he says, when the Tathagata speaks of the bodily marks, he speaks of the no possession of no marks. And then the Buddha amplifies this and says that all that has a form is an illusory existence. When the illusory nature of form is perceived, the Tathagata is recognized. So, so what do we make of this? I think when we talked last time about generosity and sort of the illusory nature of the giver and the recipient and the gift, here we're talking about the illusory experience that we have when we perceive others, when we perceive, in fact, all forms, but in particular, others. I had an experience the other day. I was driving the pantry truck on St. Charles Rock Road, which those of you who are not from St. Louis, it's a sort of a commercial strip in North St. Louis County. Lots of stores and various retail and commercial enterprises crammed in along a busy roadway. And as I was driving, I saw a woman going across the 4 lanes of traffic, which is sort of a death-defying maneuver. But it looked like she was going to get very safely to the other side of the street before my truck arrived. So I didn't pay too much mind. I was just kind of watching her. And then as she got to the curb, she stopped, turned around, and started stepping back into the road. She took a couple steps back into the road. So I put on the brakes and slowed down. And then she saw me apparently and stepped back on the curb. She had kind of a frail, gaunt appearance. She didn't seem terribly elderly. I don't know. I don't know how it sort of had an ageless look, but perhaps in her 40s. And the whole experience reminded me of a couple things. One was I don't know if you've had this experience with squirrels crossing the road. We have quite a few squirrels in our neighborhood, and for some reason they like to cross the road quite a bit. And um, most often they're sort of scampering across the road, and you can see them, and they get across the road before you can threaten them in any way with your vehicle. But sometimes they'll stop right in the lane and decide to turn around and go the other way. And and then when they do this, you have to put on the brakes in order to avoid hitting them. I don't know if they're frightened. Perhaps they notice the vehicle and they get frightened and they freeze and then they decide that, oh, maybe I should, I don't know. I don't know what goes through a squirrel's mind. But it reminded me of this woman who seemed distracted and somewhat anxious, even frightened about something that was happening on the other side of the street, which she felt like she had to get back there again. I don't know what was going on with her. Her appearance reminded me of Dorothea Lange photos from the Dust Bowl. I don't know if you're familiar with these. They were quite. Dorothea Lange was a famous photographer in the 1930s, and she took remarkable photographs of individuals experiencing um, the devastating effects of drought in the central and western United States. The woman looked kind of like this, only her cheeks were even more sunken. Which in turn reminded me of when we were once taking a trip to, I was at a meeting in Vancouver, and and at that time they were having a pretty serious problem with methamphetamines, and there were a number of individuals out on the street who looked sort of agitated and thin with bad teeth and presumably related to methamphetamine use. So I don't know. I had a number of assumptions that went through my mind about this woman as I perceived her. How do we what do we bring to our perceptions of others? Usually quite a lot. The the Buddha is encouraging us, I think, here to take a step back and consider the illusory nature of those perceptions, the perceptions of others. And the illusory nature of forms in general, all the assumptions we bring to our perceptions. There was a commentary on this section from Hui Neng, a 8th century Zen teacher, which I found helpful, and I would like to read that. Hui Neng says, ordinary people only see the physical body. They do not see the Dharma body. Thus, they cannot practice charity without focusing on appearances. They cannot practice equanimity in all places, and they cannot respect all beings. Those who see the Dharma body can practice charity without focusing on appearances. They can respect all beings, and they can cultivate the perfection of wisdom. They alone believe all beings share the same true nature that is basically pure and free of defilement, and that possesses infinite wonders. That possesses infinite wonders. So in the section on generosity, I think the Buddha is considering us or encouraging us to take a much wider view of our actions, taking into account all of the baggage we bring with it. And likewise, in this section, talking about taking a step back and considering all the baggage we bring to our perception of others. So the way I thought about it was that the Buddha is encouraging us to think in terms of swimming in a sea of ever-changing circumstance. Swimming in a sea of ever-changing circumstance, playing an ever-changing part for the benefit of ever-changing, illusory beings. Can we rest into that kind of perception, or at least be aware of that mode of perception as we go through everyday life? Or one might say, do we ever really know a person? Furthermore, what does it really mean to know a person? I think I'll stop there with those reflections, and we can go into breakout rooms and explore our take on this section of the Diamond Sutra. Thank you for listening today.